Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from today. My name is Catherine Larson, and I am the curator of ancient glass here at the Corning Museum of Glass. Thank you for joining us for this Connected by Glass program, in which we will explore the ways we are connected by one of the most ubiquitous, yet strangely invisible uses of glass: windows. I'd like to begin today's event by acknowledging that the Corning Museum of Glass is located on the ancestral home of the Haudenosaunee. We acknowledge the Haudenosaunee people and their legacy and honor the elders both past and present. I first began envisioning this panel on windows back in April. Largely homebound like so many of us around the world, my one-year-old son and I would spend our time either watching birds and squirrels out of our front window or going on walks around the neighborhood, spotting pictures and notes of encouragement posted in the windows of our neighbors. These flat panes of glass blurred the boundaries between inside and out and enabled us to feel like we were still part of the world from which we were otherwise isolated. I was moved by grandparents who met their newborn grandchildren and celebratory parades through neighborhoods, all of which were made possible by windows. Glass windows have gone to the moon and to the bottom of the ocean. They help us to see and to be seen while providing critical structural support and a protective barrier. Windows are a truly remarkable technology, and they are made possible by the strength and transparency of glass. So I'd also like to share with you a poem by Qinlong, who was Emperor of China, which he wrote more than 270 years ago, that I think really beautifully encapsulates the spirit of glass windows. My glass windows are bright and shining, clean and thick, whereas most around our little courtyard gape so that the wind blows in, piercing the gauze drapes. I can see both outside and in, and how happy I am. I think that's just lovely. So I am happy today to be welcoming our three panelists who will be discussing the past, present, and future of windows. I'm joined first by Dr. Denise Allen, who is a specialist in Roman window glass, and joining us today from the United Kingdom. Tony Board, who is Program Director of Advanced Windows Emerging Innovations Group for Corning Incorporated. And by Dr. Lihong Liu, who is Sally Michelson Davidson Assistant Professor of Chinese Arts and Cultures at the University of Michigan. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties with Lihong, so we hope she's able to join us later in the program. So we're going to speak to each of our panelists in turn, and then we'll have some time at the end to answer questions from the audience. So please post your questions in the chat as we go, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end. So we're going to start with you, Denise. So Denise, as an archaeologist, you've looked at windows that are almost 2,000 years old. What do we know about the earliest window glass and how it was made? What did these early windows look like?
Well, I honestly don't know, and I'm not sure whether anybody does know the claim to be the earliest window glass anywhere, but they certainly appear in fairly large numbers and fairly widespread in the early imperial period, so in the 1st century AD at some point. And it's possible that the first appearance of glass windows, glass, of course, as you know, had been around for a very long time, a couple of thousand of years before that. But the idea of putting glass in windows might be linked to the widespread use of the large imperial bathhouses. So you have these large spaces heated with a hypercaust, and you want to keep the heat in, but you also want to allow some daylight in. And so it's quite possible, it's not proven, that that could have been the spur. And I've mostly worked on window glass from the UK, where we just get little fragments. But if you go to Pompeii and Herculaneum, which gives us a perfect terminus antiquem of AD 79, so everything there dates to the 1st century AD, then you can see windows in situ, sometimes with glass still adhering to the edges of them. And there are two photos that I've put up. One is a little oculus in the roof of the hot room of a bath, and then a close-up of one. This is a bathhouse in Herculaneum, and you can see that in spite of the modern lighting and the capers which are growing wildly around the window opening, there are still definite bits of window glass adhering to the outside. And it's possible that these big round windows that first appear in the bathhouses were of the domed variety, and I've I've got another picture of domed window glass that came from a shipwreck off the coast of the south of France, which dates to the 2nd century. And so they were actually transporting these pieces of domed window glass, perhaps for use in imperial bathhouses around the empire. And the nice thing about the way in which these domed window glasses are made is that they're slumped over a former, which is a manufacturing technique that had been used for a long time for bowls. So there's a kind of logical step from making bowls to making great big bowls to stick in an opening in a bathhouse to keep the heat in and also let light in. And as well as the round windows, you also get square ones, and the leap from using windows in bathhouses to making domestic uses of them was almost instantaneous. So again, at Pompeii and Herculaneum, you get square windows as well. And for a long time, it was a bit of a puzzle as to how these were made. But the glassmakers Mark Taylor and David Hill were asked to make some Roman window panes for an Adam Hart Davis programme, What the Romans Did for Us. And people like me, specialists in glass, had been saying very carelessly for a long time, it's just like making a tray of toffee. You pour it into a mould, you push it into the corners, and hey presto. But they found that was impossible. And there are 2 pictures there which show Mark Taylor, and you can see that he's got a lot of protective gear on. It's not a nice job to make these window panes. You're standing right over the furnace, and you basically have to manufacture a flat disc of glass into a square by pulling it. And I actually have a pane here that they made, replicating the sort of marks. Is that on the screen now, or is it still a slide? Yeah. So the characteristics of this early 1st century window glass, we call it matte glossy. It has one surface which is matte and has been in contact with another surface. One is glossy, and it has these tool marks in the corner, as you see. And as you can see, that those are caused by Mark, sort of the window maker, sort of pulling the pane laboriously, putting it into the furnace, taking it out, manipulating it into a square. And this sort of glass with these sort of characteristic marks are found all over the empire. There are complete panes found at Pompeii, and at Herculaneum they even found the remains of a wooden frame that had lots of these panes of glass in to enclose the whole of the sort of peristyle area. So they went quite quickly to using window glass in quite a sophisticated and extensive way in the 1st century. And then in the late Roman period, there was a big sort of revolution in making window glass, and the technique changed. So the sort of glass that we find in the windows of villas, or in my case in Britain, fragments from the sites of villas, you don't find them in the windows anymore, are this cylinder blown window glass, which appears round about AD 300, very roughly, and it's formed by blowing a big bowl of glass, swinging it around to make it elongated into a cylinder, and then cracking off the top and the bottom, cracking it so it opens, heating it so that it forms a flat sheet of glass. And again, I've got a piece here, and it's much thinner than the early window glass. It's shiny on both surfaces. Within the glass, you can see elongated bubbles, which is caused by this swinging it around. And as I say, this would have actually provided a better view through it than the earlier stuff. And it's probably this sort of window pane that's shown in a wall painting on the Via Latina. This is the part of the catacombs of Rome, and it's Samson with the jawbone of an ass smiting, but in the background is presumably a temple with what are quite clearly glazed windows in them. And so this is what a window would have looked like in the late Roman period. So those 2 techniques sort of take us through the Roman period, from the early cast matte glossy window glass to the double glossy cylinder blown window glass at the end.
Thanks. That's really interesting that there's three different, very distinctive ways of making glass windows, and it takes a while to kind of get to the blown windows, even though glass blowing technology existed. Do we know anything about what people thought about these windows? Like, how do the Romans think about windows? How did they conceptualize them?
Well, the interesting thing is how widespread. I mean, again, most of the glass I've looked at has come from Britain, and even the sort of meanest Romano-British farmstead or townhouse, as well as the big exotic villas, seem to have had window glass. It doesn't seem to have been as precious as it was in later periods, because glass was very ubiquitous and quite cheap and easy to make. It would have been very useful in Britain, of course, and I think that peristyle, even in Herculaneum, that had been glazed in. I mean, if you've been to Herculaneum in the winter, you know that the terrible Mediterranean storms can blow in. So it was definitely being used quite widely for comfort and warmth. And you would have been able to see a fair amount through them. There is a nice riddle from the 4th century which survives, and it compares very nicely with the one that you quoted at the beginning. So it's by a 4th century writer called Symphosius, who wrote a number of riddles, and it is this idea of glass being something that's there and yet it's not. So the riddle is, I'm looked right through and I do not hinder the eye's vision, letting it wander through my body and beyond. The winter does not pass through me, but the sun sparkles within me. So that again, it's that magical property of keeping you warm, but letting the light in. Yeah, so that hopefully sort of sums up what other people thought as well. We don't know, you know, they didn't write a lot about window glass, unfortunately. We just know that they used it quite widely.
That's really, the parallels are really quite interesting, that 1,000 years apart and around the world, you know, there's just kind of this magic of windows that we're really talking about today. Thanks.
Yeah.
So we're still working with Lihong. So we're going to jump forward in time quite a bit and turn to Tony. So Tony, in the Roman period, as Denise was just discussing, glass windows were, even though they're ubiquitous in these farmhouses, they're still, you know, quite precious and small. You know, the panels that Denise showed us were quite small. And these windows kind of indicated a certain status level, but that doesn't seem to be the case anymore, right? I'm looking out huge panes of windows out my office right now. What changed?
Well, there's a couple of things that changed over the preceding centuries. I think the glass that was talked to was all basically handmade and in a batch process. You made a cylinder, or you made a circular piece of glass that was spun, but it was all made in pieces. That was improved upon with a cast plate process in 1984. This was invented in the UK, but it was still a batch process. So it really wasn't until 1959 when the Pilkin brothers invented the first commercial application for forming a continuous ribbon of glass using a molten tin bar. So this truly was a mechanized continuous process, and it really was, you know, one of the top 10 inventions, I think. So with that ability now to make continuous large sheets of pretty flat glass, glass then became something that you could use in many different applications. A little later on, Corning actually took the horizontal process and turned it vertically, inventing what's called the fusion drawn process. And that particular glass now has become the glass of choice for the electronics display industry. They were looking in the 1980s for flatter, thinner, and more pristine glass, and Corning's invention, which actually had been sitting dormant for a few years, was the perfect answer. And it enables what we see today with large screen TVs and tough cover glass for smartphones. So the mechanization and the ability to make glass continuously really revolutionized the glass window business.
More technological revolutions, it seems, in these glass. It's this continuing process of innovation. But what is it about glass that really makes it so good, for such a good material for windows, and what makes a good window?
So if you could flip back to the previous slide, I'm going to drop down and look at the bottom part. There's a number of things that you're asking a window to do. It needs to perform obviously under a variety of different weather conditions, hot and cold. It needs to be thermally efficient, keep the rain out, keep the drafts out, and it needs to have a lifetime that's compatible with the life of the building. And so, homes can be around for 50, hundreds of years, so you want your glass window to survive that period of time. So when you're designing a glass window, there's a number of technical attributes that add to the performance of the window. And if we look at the time scale on the bottom part of my chart there, in the 1930s, an invention by Haven was the introduction of a double pane window. So this is adding thermal improvement to the window. And then in 1983, another invention was the ability to put coatings on the glass itself. It's referred to as a low E coating. Anderson in the US introduced windows for the first time with these coatings on. And the coatings basically in the summer keep the hot out and the cold in. And then in the winter, it's the reverse of that, keeps the cold out and your warm, interior of the building cozy. So we've got double pane windows, we've got the introduction of low E glazings, and then at the same period of time, they started filling the gap between the two panes. So originally it was air filling, and then they started putting gases in there, which improved the thermal performance. And then in the 1970s, those that were around for that period remember the energy crisis. And so cost of oil skyrocketed, and people became a lot more conscious and aware of the need to be energy conversant. And so at that time, there were a lot of initiatives to try and improve particularly the thermal performance of homes and windows. And in the US, the Energy Star rating started to come in. So in 1998, we saw the first Energy Star rated windows. And those windows are rated for thermal performance, which includes what they call the U value and the solar heat gain, and also for air leakage. Those are the important things when it comes to the thermal performance. Windows that continue to evolve, and with that process that I talked about from Pilkington, it's incredible how large a piece of glass you can manufacture compared to what the Romans were able to do. So I've got an example here of an Apple store in China. It was built in 2015, and those pieces of glass you see are a continuous piece that's almost 50 foot high. That's pretty incredible.
Wow, and I think the significance of what that does for getting a little feedback. The significance of what that does for architecture too, and what can you do in terms of a space is really remarkable.
Yes,
so so that's we've covered our history lesson in windows so far. What are the current trends that you're working on in window glass? And in addition to these new features, what are exciting innovations that we can expect to see?
So I think there's three key trends in the window industry, and I've tagged them as there's the green trend, the comfy trend, and the smart trend. And I'd like to spend a little time just going through each one of these. But these are, if I look at what industry's saying, listen to the blogs and so on, these are kind of the key things that are happening that are driving, new window features. So if we have a look at the green window, so the green window is being driven by a couple of things. One is codes are getting tougher. So for instance, state of California recently introduced a new building code that is driving the move to a triple pane window. So, we talked about the double pane. Windows can actually be triple pane, and now you have two cavities that you can put gas into, and that improves the thermal performance. So there's code-driven change. And then the other side to that is too that there's a lot more desire for net carbon zero homes, or net zero homes, they're sometimes referred to, or even passive homes. And so these are either individuals or state and federal initiatives that are working to improve the thermal performance of buildings by putting in highly performing window units. So the green trend has started, and if you look at the bottom scale, it's really interesting. Typical windows today, that Energy Star label on, are in terms of their thermal performance about an R2 or an R3. That's what's called, double pane window. It probably has an argon gas in and a low E coating. You can buy triple pane windows today. They're about an R5. And then there's a window initiative in the industry that's going to this super window, which is trying to move the performance of the window up to an R6. But look at the performance of your window compared to a 4-inch insulated, fiberglass insulated wall, which is an R13. So, in a typical home today, the window area only represents about 10% of the outside surface of the home, and yet 40% of the heat in the home could be lost through the windows. So the windows have got a lot of catch up to do to even get to the value where they're anything close to the insulation performance of a standard wall. So the green movement is exploring these super efficient triple pane windows. So that's one trend. The second trend, if we go to the next slide, is what I'm calling comfy, and it's bigger, brighter, safer, and quieter windows. So I think if you look in a lot of new homes today, you'll see more glass, and in particular, there's a trend to sort of creating the indoor-outdoor living space. People want to take their indoors out and bring the outdoors in. So you're getting much larger, patio doors, or even nested roller patio doors in a lot of homes. So that needs bigger pieces of glass, stiffer pieces of glass, and at the same time, you're trying to maintain the thermal performance. In addition to that, there are other features that people are looking for. So storm-resistant glass windows, particularly if you live in the eastern coast, you live in Florida, and you have hurricane season. So actually, building code in Florida now requires a hurricane-resistant performance out of the window. People that are living in metropolitan areas don't want to hear the noise from their neighbors, and so they want to have acoustic dampening built into the window, or they want the windows to be burglary resistant. So I think what's happening is, when you bought a new home, the features offered by the builder were typically upgrading the countertops to marble, or maybe putting a wooden floor instead of carpet. I think what we're going to see is that the windows actually now become a feature option. So do you want quieter windows? Do you want bigger windows, etc.? Really interesting. And then the last trend I wanted to talk about on the next slide is smart windows. So we can move to the next slide. Yeah, so these are either tintable, self-tinting, or privacy windows. And the easiest way to think of a smart windows is taking a TV panel display and putting it between two panes of glass. And then electrically, you can control the density of the gray. And so you can go from almost a transparent normal window to a much more darkened window, or in the case of a privacy window, you've got like a clear state and a dark state. We're seeing these windows being introduced, especially in commercial buildings. They're still very expensive for residential homes, and typically these smart windows are linked to some kind of building control system. So as the sun moves during the day, the window would automatically tint, so you don't have that glare coming into your office buildings. So it's kind of super cool. In fact, every window in a tintable window building has its own unique IP address, and so you can actually give the office occupant or the window owner an app that goes on their smartphone. They can actually control their window individually. So we've also seen these windows in hospitals where patients can control the light or dark from their bed. One of the advantages in a hospital with the tintable windows that they don't need to put blinds up, and blinds in a hospital are not a good thing. You can't really keep them super clean. So this is a great answer to that. So that's the last trend, and these windows are only just starting to appear, and we're going to see more and more of these electronic tintable windows start appearing, and eventually you'll see them in homes as well. Anyone that's got a big patio door that looks over the lake or over the ocean when the sun's setting would love to have one of these.
That's it. You can do so much with a window.
Yes.
So I think we have Lihong on now, audio only. Lihong, are you there? You might need to unmute.
Actually, Kate, she's going to have to call back in again.
Okay, well, that's fine. We can move to, we've got some great questions that have been coming in for Denise and Tony. So Denise, for you, we have a couple questions about the ingredients of Roman glass. So what do we know about what they were using to make that glass, and do we know much about how similar it is to our windows today? That might be a question that Tony can chime in on as well. But we'll start with Denise.
Well, it seems that Roman window glass is soda lime glass, and the main ingredient of that is silica sand. So that's something that in certain parts of the world is very plentiful. In order to lower the melting point of the silica, you have to add soda to it, and that probably came from natural deposits of soda natron, which occur in desert conditions, like Wadi Natron in Egypt, for example. And then small amounts of lime need to be in there as well to stop it from being soluble in water. And that was probably there as shells, naturally in the other ingredients. So basically, ancient glass was made by mixing large amounts of sand to an amount of soda, and that, in certain parts of the world, and this is the parts of the world, Egypt and Mesopotamia, where glass first appears about 2500 BC, they just went out and there's a wonderful line. You remember Bill Bryson's books, and he in his first one about notes on a small island around Britain, and he said, who was the first person who walked out and looked at a load of sand and said, do you know, I think I could make windows out of that. It does seem a huge leap from sand to clear windows, but and consequently, as I said, glass was actually in certain parts of the world made out of very cheap and easy ingredients, and it was a sort of alchemy, really, because it's making a brand new, clear, magical, semi-liquid substance out of very base ingredients, and very soon took on because of that. In fact, Pliny, the Roman writer who was killed during the eruption of Vesuvius, or died during the eruption of Vesuvius, he had a story about some sailors who had a cargo of natron, of soda, which was used for other things like mummification and other things as well, on their ship. They built a campfire at the mouth of the river Belus, where there was nice white silica sand, put their pots on the fire, and lo and behold, they stood their pots on these cakes of soda, and lo and behold, glass flowed out of the bottom of the fire. But in fact, that couldn't have been true, because you couldn't get the right temperatures. But it's Pliny making a nice story about how it might have happened from these ingredients.
Tony, does that compare to modern window glass?
Yeah, interestingly enough, the basic ingredients for soda lime glass have not changed. I mean, you can get glass with tints in, so they add other ingredients, but basic properties and ingredients are very much the same.
Great. We've got a worldwide audience joining us. We have people from Massachusetts and Los Angeles and New Zealand and the UK. So hello to everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I think we do have Lihong on now. Lihong, are you there?
Hi.
Hi. So glad. I'm
Can you hear
so
me?
glad. Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I'm so sorry. There's some technical issues today here, and I'm speaking now from my phone, and I have my slides over there.
Yep, we've got your slides all loaded up. So yeah, we're excited to talk to you. So especially we've been talking a lot about glass windows and the history of glass windows, and you're coming in not as a glass specialist, but an art historian with a background in early modern China. What can you tell us about glass windows in early modern China?
Yes, I'm an art historian, and from my disciplinary background, I can speak a little bit about why I have embarked on this project. So the study of art history in recent years has undergone significant change. It has expanded the study of artworks of traditional mediums such as painting and sculpture to include common objects and the materials in people's everyday lives. So I'm interested in especially seeing art objects in the dynamics of global exchange. When I took on glass as a subject of study, I was looking to experiment with these new approaches. So of course, but personally, I have been very curious about glass as a material and its function and meaning in human societies. I started to ask questions like, how has glass windows connected our experiences of daily life, and how has it changed people's relationship to their living environment, etc. So as I dived into the project, I found that glass is a fascinating material because it has always been circulated among different parts of the world throughout history, and it has a very deep history than we would have thought of. Because today we see glass as a ubiquitous construction material, but prior to its modern history, glass has been very rare and exceptionally precious. I'm especially intrigued by the innovation of transparent glass and its cultural and transcultural implications in the early modern world. There were some major developments in the early modern period. Back to the 15th century, the Venetian glass makers in Italy were able to produce colorless glass by using some raw materials imported from the Middle East. And then the so-called Venetian fashion spread across Europe. By the mid-17th century, the Venetian migrant glass makers in France could produce large-sized plate glass. So with this production of large sheets of glass, making big mirrors and the big windows became possible. And that was a major technological innovation of glass. At that time, under the direction of the French King Louis XIV, the French Royal Glass Company produced large plate glass and controlled the market. But gradually, competition among private glass makers arose, which fostered the exportation of glass in a global system of long-distance trade. So towards the end of the 17th century, some French glass makers arrived in China through the cargo of the East India Company. They managed to establish a factory in the Chinese portal city Canton at that time. And just prior to that, actually, the Kangxi Emperor had employed some Jesuit missionaries at the court in Beijing in order to produce European-style glass. At the beginning, of course, glass was mostly were used in the royal palaces in China, of course, because it was pretty expensive. And then as the production developed, the consumption of transparent glass in the palaces peaked in the second half of the 18th century. So today I'm going to show some examples from that period of time. So this image shows an example of how large sheets of glass were used to renovate the palace in the 1770s. As you can see here, large glass sheets are mounted within wooden wall panels. Here, glass replaced the materials such as paper or gauze, which had been traditionally used as window screens. Glass was very much favored by the emperors at that time because it is transparent, so they could see the plants in the gardens from inside. At the same time, it protects the interior space from dust and cold weather and extreme climate changes, etc. But besides its utilitarian advantages, the use of glass also generated a novel aesthetic appeal. So transparent plate glass itself is a very simple material medium, in terms of its look, but it becomes visually dazzling and sophisticated when it interacts with its surrounding objects, with the fluctuation of light and the reflection in the space. So this image shows the variation of how to mount plate glass on the walls and the doors. On the left, you see bamboo patterns surround the glass panels. And on the right, the woodwork delineates geometrical patterns on the glass panes. So in both cases, the wooden structures define the doors and the wall panels, which instigate different visual perception of the glass panes in the two architectural spaces. In a various ways of installing glass panes, not only were there many different framing patterns, but also the crafting of the panes varied. In this slide, I'm showing you three kinds of techniques and styles of installing glass panes as described in period terms. The first is installing full panes, as we have seen in the wall panels. The second is called fragmenting and dividing. Here you can see that the panes are crafted in a particular shape in order to fit into the design of the window. The third and the most intriguing one is called installing glass window eye. So the glass pane in the center of the square frame is the eye of the window. When we look into the window, we are encountering the eye of the window. This description indicates that the window has an agency because it can look back at us through the glass eye. So the window enlivens the architectural space and also is the focus of display. In this slide, you can see that the glass window eye is comparable to two other ways of showcasing the centrality of the window space. On the lower left is an embroidery of flowers and plants in the center, and on the lower right is a miniature rock mountain, which you can often see in a Chinese garden. The concept behind this design is that the window space connects the interior with the outdoor spaces, but with a glass pane, which is very simple compared to the other two forms of designs. One can see through it into the garden directly. At the same time, this comparison also tells us that the window is a screen to be looked at, as it frames and displays a view that is imagined to be projected onto the surface of the window screen, even though the view is three-dimensional in space. So in some cases, as shown in this slide, glass panes were painted with elaborate decorative patterns in order to draw people's attention to their surfaces. On your right-hand side is a painted glass panel framed by wooden strips and three-dimensional patterns made of bamboo. On your left-hand side are two comparable decorative designs in different mediums. On the upper left is a flower pattern composed of painted ceramic framed by wooden carvings. On the lower left is a bed framed by embroidery panels. So these comparisons also indicate that the use of glass in walls or windows were integrated into the whole program of interior design and decoration at the time. It draws people's attention in different ways. In this case, the smooth surface of the glass enhances the decorative pattern painted on it, while it also showcases that the glass can be used as an artistic medium in the architectural space, which helps to display the complex patterning of the walls. And finally, I really would like to stress that window is a site of contemplation as well as visual intelligence. Window does not only allow us to see through it, but also encourage us to comprehend the world within it and around it. So in the cases of the 18th century windows, as we have seen here, that the painted glass panels attract people to look at the surfaces as if they are screens. This concept is very much alive in today's virtual windows. We know that Microsoft names its product Windows, which indicates that the computer screen opens up a virtual world in front of us as if it is a window or window within window and within window. This metaphor, however, emphasizes that the window is also a screen, because when we look at our computer screens or cell phone screens, we configure our information and project the extension of our thinking onto a planar and smooth surface. And those surfaces, which, by the way, are always made of glass, or mostly made of glass. So I think that's a very interesting metaphor in the digital world about windows as well. So I will just end it here, and we can certainly discuss more through questions and answers.
Fabulous. That's so interesting. I was just jotting down a few kind of notes and points of comparison and between all three of our panelists today, and thinking about, you know, this kind of rarity versus ubiquity of the windows and the material, this kind of tension between transparency, between, you know, we titled this episode Looking at Windows because we're used to looking through windows, but I think Lihong just demonstrated this looking, sometimes you do look at windows when you have these surface treatments, and windows is part of interior design and decoration. Really, I think, great threads that kind of connect us across time. So we do have some more questions I'd like to kind of get to. So for, I guess for all of you, maybe can you imagine a world without glass windows, and what would it look like? Let's start with Tony.
It would be a pretty drafty, cold experience.
And dark, right?
And dark, yes, yeah. Yeah, you know, Corning is all about glass, and we often talk about where glass is going, but, you know, Windows is one of the mainstream applications, and it would be a very different place if we didn't have glass today.
Denise, do you have any thoughts on that topic?
Yes, well, certainly cold and chilly is the obvious thing. I mean, they have tried through history to make windows of other materials. I mean, they succeeded. Things like alabaster. I suppose it's cheating slightly, but obsidian glass was used for the cathedrals and things in Pompeii. It's still glass, even though it's a natural volcanic glass. But obviously, these materials were more difficult to work and more difficult to get hold of than glass windows, and in some cultures they might put skins and things over the gaps to you know, animal skins, to try and keep the cold out but still allow a bit of gloomy light in. But as you say, it certainly would be a very different world without glass. Yeah.
Lihong, do you have any thoughts to share on a world without glass windows?
Yeah, this is a fascinating comment, and back to your comment about why we need a window and why window is better to be transparent. That means why we favor glass window. Well, I think there are, well, when we look into history, there are several things we have to bear in mind, that even if we had a window, and even if people used the glass window at the beginning, they played with this boundary between visibility and invisibility. So sometimes they actually would intentionally cover the glass, cover the window. So you have a little bit of mystery. So transparency goes along with secrecy. So the household can have more privacy, or in some cases, like in England, people cover the glass because they want to avoid the very expensive glass tax, because when you use glass in the window, you pay high tax at that time. So there are many ways of manipulating the invisibility of glass windows in the early modern world. But transparency is always a fantasy, and it's always a fascination for people with glass windows. So I imagine when we look out through the windows, we are aware of the material barrier we are encountering. So that's a fascination of visual experience we have in our consciousness with glass window. Imagine if we look at if we look through a hole of the wall into the outside space, that's a very different experience in terms of how we situate our body and our eye and our experience between the interior and the outdoor spaces. But when we look at a window, we feel that we are also protected by a material barrier that itself negates its own existence. So I think that's our fascination with transparent glass window, and I think it's very complex bodily and psychological response to this architectural space as well. Yeah,
absolutely. We have a few questions for Tony on some of the more technical aspects of glass. So I'll combine these. How can glass be made burglary resistant? And how have the optical properties of privacy glass changed?
So glass can be made burglary resistant or impact resistant or security proof by laminating it to another piece of glass with a interlayer. So there's it's a polyvinyl layer that's put between two panes of glass, and that layer, the two pieces of glass are heated and it basically fuses together. So a laminated piece of glass, which is what it's referred to, it's actually difficult to even know that there's two panes there, but that two panes and that interlayer make it very difficult to break the glass to get through it. The same construction's used in a hurricane-proof glass. So if you have flying debris, it actually doesn't penetrate into the interior. And then you were asking about privacy glass. So that's again, it's the concept of putting a TV display panel between two panes of glass and being able to electrically make it go very dark or opaque so you can see through it.
Thanks. And I've got another one for you. Is there potential for fusion draw glass in architecture or energy efficiency?
That's a really good question. As someone might have observed, my title is Program Director for Advanced Windows. So clearly, Corning is always looking for new opportunities, and we're exploring the window space with the glass that we make, which is fusion glass. More to come.
That was quite circumspect, but maybe that takes us to I think what can maybe be our final question. What do you see as the future of glass? Again, maybe for all of our future of glass windows, maybe for all of you. So let's start in the distant past. Denise, do you have ideas for the future of glass windows from your Roman background?
Well, the quest actually in the Roman period, there was this sort of long-standing story for unbreakable glass. So it was interesting going back to what Tony said again. There was this story that appears in the Satyricon of Petronius about how the glassmakers had discovered an unbreakable glass, but the discoverer had been killed because otherwise, all the other glass makers didn't want, and the precious metal trade would also have been threatened by it. So I suppose, putting it into a historical context, they've always been, looking for the next technical development and thinking there must be something else they can do with it. But I think it's much more Tony's field, the future of Windows, than mine. Yeah.
Lihong, any thoughts on the future of glass windows?
Well, it's fascinating because glass kept evolving and it has such a deep history, and some materials change and disappear over time, but glass seems to become more and more fashionable. And of course, now we have all the digital devices that are made of glass, and they have the concept of glass window in their design and in their configuration, etc. But in terms of the physical glass window, I don't see why we will not live with glass window. And in fact, there are so many modern architecture that are built by using glass on the walls. So window actually become different in different forms as well. So it's not only just one opening of a wall, or several openings of a wall, but the whole wall is a big window that really connects us, our sense of being with nature more. But of course, the production of glass has many other downsides as well, because it can be ecologically unfriendly sometimes. We have to invest a lot of natural resources in order to produce this industrial material. But I think for myself, I can say that glass lends itself for people's imagination of futuristic buildings and cities and just human world. And we can always say this shimmering and semi-invisible structures in a lot of sci-fi fiction and movies. And so definitely glass itself presents the quality of futuristic imagination of human civilization.
All right, thank you. And Tony, I think you kind of answered this in a couple of different ways, but I'll give you the final word on it.
Okay, and if it's possible to go quickly to my last slide, I can actually talk to some innovating ideas for glass. I don't know if you can get to that, but thin glass is lightweight, but it's also very flexible. And so there's applications, new applications for lightweight and flexible glass that we're still dreaming of. We've actually used some of our glass for interior decorative wall coverings. They make a very dramatic display. There's actually some of our glass in the new Contemporary Art and Design Museum, in the Corning Museum glass. It's used as a display glass. So it's thin and tough, but more importantly, it offers exceptional optical clarity. So that's another advantage of thin glass. We're also working with the automotive industry to put our glass into the windshield and displays inside the glass. But the windshield, if it's lighter and tougher, means that the car is more lightweight, and obviously you get more gas mileage. And then think about flexible glass. I think you probably heard in the press about foldable smartphones, but what happens if you could have a window that doesn't need a frame, that's so thin you could open it, or it opened depending on the environmental conditions. So lots of ideas and concepts.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, that means we've reached the end of our time together today. I want to thank all our guests, Denise Allen, Lihong Liu, and Tony Board, for I think what was a really interesting discussion about glass windows across time and space. I'd also like to thank all our viewers for joining us from around the world, from those of you joining us from Japan, Belgium, Germany, Paris, Argentina, and elsewhere. I'm sorry if we didn't have time to answer all your questions today. There's obviously a lot to discuss here and a lot of really rich materials. So if you're interested in the history of windows, our new publication in Sparkling Company does include a chapter on windows and plate glass during the 1800s, and it's available from our shops. And our panelists have also written really interesting material on it. So go to Google and check it out. This has been a great discussion, and I hope everyone at home enjoyed watching as much as I did. So this episode of Connected by Glass, if you missed something and want to go back, will be added to our YouTube channel along with all previous episodes featuring wildly different topics, such as fiber optics, the Netflix series Blown Away, and Murano, Italy. If you are enjoying the Connected by Glass series, please consider supporting the Corning Museum of Glass so we can continue to bring you compelling content. We'll be back with another episode of Connected by Glass soon. Look for more details on our social media pages. We hope you've been inspired to see glass in a new light, in this case, to see into history through the windows that surround us. We invite you to explore the exciting world of glass at the Corning Museum of Glass. Please head to our website to plan your visit. Thanks.